Hey everyone, it has been a while. I was sick for a little while, and then there wasn't much Black Series news actually to cover, but we're getting towards the end of the year, and I thought this would be a good time to make a best and worst of 2023 video. Overall, this was actually an incredible year for the Black Series, but every once in a while, certain figures come out that just totally fall short of our expectations. But the good news is that there are way more good figures than bad figures on this list, so let's start with the good figures. As you guys know, I pretty much collect everything that comes out in the Black Series in terms of new sculpts. I pass on a lot of the credit collections and those kind of like gimmick lines, but for the most part, I think I've picked up every figure that has come out this year. And also, I want to address the fact that I understand that these figures are actually really incredibly hard to make, and that the team at Hasbro does an amazing job, and they have made so many strides in terms of engineering and technology with the face printing, updated articulation. They're constantly innovating, and I really appreciate what they do. And I always feel a little bit guilty like talking about a figure being terrible, but I think that it's fair to compare like the worst of the figures to the best of the figures, since we know what is possible. And I think that sometimes, things get rushed, or they just, are working with inaccurate concept art based on a show that hasn't come out yet. But whatever the reason, sometimes things just fall short, and I think it's okay to call that out. So I want to start with one of my favorites of the year, which is the Return of the Jedi Luke Skywalker. He does have the alternate chest plate, so you can like switch that out and make that scene specific. But this is just one of those figures that you have it out on your desk and you just can't help but pick it up. When I see it on my shelf, I just want to get it out and play with it. The posability is really nice. I think that it's pretty proportionate and just has a pretty decent face print. I know the Mark Hamill's likeness is really difficult to get right, but I think these eyes look really alive, and they did a really good job with this figure. This next one might surprise some people, but I really love the Luthen Rail figure. It is one that I could not put down when it was on my desk. I love the character. I think they executed this really well. It's not very actionable in terms of a figure, but neither is the character. But this, kind of along with Mon Mothma, were two figures that made me really happy to get. And that's kind of what we're focusing on in this video, just figures that I was really happy to get this year. Next one is Cal Kestis from Jedi Survivor. This is the slightly older looking Cal, even though I think the figure looks a little bit younger. But this is just one of those figures that is so fun to pose around. I don't know what they have changed recently with the articulation, but it just feels like no matter what you do, it looks natural and it looks cool. There's certain figures that come out, which something we'll talk about in this video, that, no matter what you do to them, they just always look awkward. You can't just get them to stand up. And this is just one of those that however you seem to pose him, it just looks natural, it looks real, and it is just so much fun. Not to mention that Cal Kestis is probably one of my favorite characters in Star Wars, period. I love these games. Really enjoyed seeing his story, especially in the first game. Next we have Ahsoka Tano Padawan from the Clone Wars. This art on the side is definitely not as nice as the figure, which is rare. But seeing the female sculpts they've done over the years, especially animated characters such as Clone Wars Ahsoka in the blue outfit, or like some of the Rebels figures like Sabine, sometimes they really kind of bungle the animated style, but I think they just got such a nice balance here. She still feels like her animated character, but is actually a great figure. It is fun to pose around. The face looks amazing. And it's an outfit that I didn't think that we were going to get this soon after the original Clone Wars Ahsoka released. So just the fact that this came out just makes me really happy. It tells me that Hasbro is paying attention to what the fans want. Another pleasant surprise is Omega from The Bad Batch Season 2. Now this figure is kind of cool, especially because it comes with an alternate head that not only can you use on the figure itself, but you can go ahead and put that head on the Season 1 body. I know a lot of people that actually just have the Season 1 Bad Batch set and got this figure just so they can make the proper Omega from Season 1, since she originally had the medallion on her head that was only seen in the first episode. So having this come with the different accessories and the alternate head was a really nice surprise. The Phase 2 clone is a great example of the innovation that the Black Series team keeps bringing to the line. If you compare it to the Phase 1 only from a few years ago, they still have taken this sculpt that was already quite new and innovated on it a bit, just adding the knee pads here, adding some bicep swivel, fixing the way that the shoulder pads work, and then they even gave us an alternate head, which I don't think anyone was expecting. It's definitely not the best face print that we've seen in the line, but considering that this is the alternative instead of just getting a blank head with the helmet glued on, I think that's quite nice, because I know a lot of people would pop those helmets off and paint their own heads. By the way, if you are enjoying the video so far, please go ahead and subscribe if you are not already. And real quick, there were some amazing figures this year, such as Darth Malak, Darth Malgus, Duels, and Vader. There are so many, and I would love to hear from you guys in the comments below which ones are your favorites, especially if I don't mention them on this list. That doesn't mean that they were not good figures. I just didn't necessarily get too excited about them for whatever reason. Either a lack of connection to the character, maybe like the Duels and Vader just had so much reuse that it didn't necessarily get me that excited. But please, if I missed one of your favorite figures, leave a comment below. I would love to hear from you. So back to some figures that I loved. The Sabine Wren figure, I don't think the face sculpt is like the best that they've done, but something about this figure I just love. It also just has that newer sculpting and articulation that just makes the figure so fun to pose. I did have a little bit of trouble with the thighs given the lack of the thigh swivel here, but for the most part, I just have so much fun posing this figure around, especially once you get that helmet on. She just looks so amazing. Another figure I was really excited about was the Endor Rebel Commando. Definitely a bit expensive and has its flaws, such as the knees that aren't painted, so once you bend them, all that camo print disappears and you just have a light gray knee. But I thought the execution and the sculpt of this was pretty amazing, and I built out this whole Endor bunker that I 3D printed with a bunch of custom Endor commandos using, I think, like maybe 4 or 5 different commando figures, and then just a bunch of spare parts from other figures such as like Marvel Legends and G.I. Joe, and then a custom Captain Rex head from Fett Clone that I had to put on that body. Another figure that I think is just a great example of amazing sculpting and articulation is Old Master Maul. This is technically from Battlefront, but also very similar to his Rebels appearance. So I think I've seen this on more people's Rebels shelves than on like a gaming grade shelf, since a lot of the gaming grades figures are part of larger properties anyway. Usually people kind of like arrange their figures in other categories rather than just a gaming grade section. And since I am such a fan of the Rebels look, we went ahead and designed a scarf and bandolier that we were able to paint and stick right onto the Old Master figure, and it looks really seamless. And this just kind of made like that perfect Rebels Maul. So when I have him up on my shelf, I just like the way this looks a lot better. If you do have a resin printer or access to someone who has one, these are available on my Patreon, or you can find a lot of these on Etsy from other sellers that are allowed to sell my files. I'm lucky enough to live semi-close to Disneyland, and every time I go, I am thrilled to go into Doc Ondar's Den of Antiquities, and I always spend some time looking at the animatronic of Doc Ondar. And this is just one of those figures that makes me happy every time I pick it up. He just poses so well given the strange alien sculpt. The head articulation, the hands, like everything just looks so natural and real. And you know I had to go ahead and design and 3D print his little shop, including all of the little lightsabers that you can buy at the Disney parks. But this diorama just makes me enjoy this figure so much more, and as soon as I saw it revealed, I knew that I was going to go ahead and make the whole shop, and so this is one of those figures that I just really enjoy. One other thing about me is I really love a good 2-pack, especially just like a little battle in a box. You've got your good guy and bad guy in the box together. I was really disappointed to see this go on clearance so fast, because I just thought this was such an amazing release. The price was a bit steep, you know. You see $26, $27 for a figure, you can kind of justify that, but seeing $55 for 2 figures, suddenly it really puts the cost into perspective, and I think a lot of people did pass on this, especially since Cobb Vanth was a figure that had already been released in the line. But I love this Cad Bane figure, and this is just one of those sets that every time I see it in a store, I want to come home with it, even though I already have it. If you collect, you know what I'm talking about. Sometimes you just see figures that you just enjoy so much that you just want to buy them, even though you already have them. Maybe I sound crazy, but I think some of you are going to know what I'm talking about here. It feels like we waited years for a proper Black Chrysanthemum figure, and I think Hasbro totally nailed it with this sculpt. This, you know, in hand, it just feels exactly like Chrysanthemum. Some people thought he was a little bit too short, especially when you compare him to like Chewbacca or something. He seems a little short, but compared to Fennec and Boba, I think he looks great. Definitely some minor articulation issues, such as at the elbows. It's kind of hard to get him into too many dynamic poses, but I think overall his presence on the shelf is just undeniable, and he really brings that Book of Boba Fett shelf to life. Okay, this next figure might surprise a couple of people. It's a little bit older. It kind of came out towards the beginning of this year, but this figure, I really love it because I think it is such a symbol of when the Black Series really shifted to like this current phase of just like really impressive proportions and posability. I remember just getting this figure out of the box and just being like, oh, okay, we're like in a new phase here. And I'm a big fan of Bill Burr, and I just thought his performance in the show was amazing. This was the Migs Mayfeld outfit that we wanted from the start, instead of that like Morak Imperial disguise version. But something about this figure, every time I see it, I just want to take it off the shelf and pose it around, and that's why it's on my list. I know it's kind of silly to include this figure instead of like Darth Malgus, but I think we all like different things, and I think that's what's so cool about the line, is that it has such a broad range, and this is just one that I just enjoy. Speaking of like a new era for the Black Series, this R2-D2 is just such an amazing feat of engineering, especially when you compare it to the first Black Series R2-D2 that was just kind of like the legs were really soft and wonky and it was just so undersized. And just seeing them take a character that they've made so many different sculpts of and just totally redo the sculpt from scratch and then continue to iterate on that with like the R5 that came out afterwards and Grief Karga's droid. I'm so excited for not only this figure itself, but for what this means for the line moving forward, that we're just going to get so many astromechs. I hope we get like 3 or 4 new astromechs every year using this new body. I have almost no complaints about this figure other than maybe the way that the storage works. It's not bad, but it's not perfect, and the things don't really click in, but this is kind of just like a bonus feature anyway, and really doesn't affect my enjoyment of the figure too much. A couple weeks ago, actually, I was looking for the scope that goes on the top of his head from like the Dagobah scene, and I was ripping up my like storage bins, just trying to think where would I have put all of his accessories. I could not for the life of me figure out where I had stored these, and then like 2 days later I realized that they were all stored in his head, and I completely forgot that that feature existed. I felt so silly. Okay, so now we have to talk about the worst figures of the year, and I think what makes these figures stand out to me is that there were so many great figures of this year, and just in general, almost everything that's coming out just has this modern, amazing articulation and sculpting, just the face printing, it was like so much value had been added to the line. I know some people don't feel that way or might not agree, but overall there's definitely like an upward momentum happening in terms of the quality and figure selection as well, like the Starkiller figure and so many of the pipeline figures like the Super Battle Droid, stuff that we just thought we would never get. And so overall, I think we're moving in a really good direction, and that's why these next few figures were just so disappointing when they did come out, because of, you know, the direction it seemed we were heading, and then suddenly it felt like we screeched to a halt. It really breaks my heart to have this on my worst figures of the year list, but Balin's skull was just a severe disappointment given how highly anticipated this figure was. I think it was pretty clear, even just from the trailers, that this character was going to be pretty special, and the scaling issues are just so mind-bogglingly bad. I really don't understand how this happened. I don't know if this was like rushed out, because we did get so many waves almost all at once towards the end of the year. It was like 3 waves seemed to kind of release all at the same time in terms of like even just showing up overseas, like as they come out of the factory. And this was just one of those figures that I don't know if this was rushed, if they went to a new factory that they hadn't before that just didn't understand how the Black Series scaling works, or if they kind of like skipped the step where the factory sends a physical prototype, because I know that takes several weeks, and when you're trying to get figures out in line with a show, you really have to like cut out any spare time that you can. But whatever happened, I would have happily waited an extra year for this figure to get it scaled correctly. And the same goes for Shin Hati, who is also from the same wave, and you know, a good sculpt overall, but just totally oversized. Like, she and Balin are the exact same height, and I really went into this in the video review, so you can check that out if you want to hear me complain about this even more. And of course there are way bigger problems in the world, but for, you know, what this is, I don't know how this was just fumbled so badly. I honestly can't think of another time that we've had figures in the line that were so out of scale, at least not in recent memory. Maybe like the original Bush Leia or figures from like the early days of the Black Series, but I feel like from the past 5-6 years we haven't seen anything remotely like this. And the third figure on my worst of the year list is from the same exact wave of figures, which is Marek. He is just totally off in terms of color. I think the sculpt is totally on point, but the choices that were made here in terms of the armor and like the intensity of the rust, again, I don't know if this was a lack of like seeing a physical prototype from the factory and just, you know, artwork or original digital sculpting just not translating properly into production, but this just looks like a credit collection figure, and there's absolutely no way I'm putting this on my shelf without a lot of alterations. And I have promised that I'm going to make a video kind of showing how to fix up this figure. Just from being sick and like traveling, I just haven't had time, but I do plan on making that video soon because I'm really looking forward to kind of fixing this up with a little bit of paint. And it's just so strange that we had such an amazing year for the Black Series, and then all of a sudden these 3 figures come out in the same wave that are just total outliers that just all have significant issues. But what's weird is they got the hard stuff right, you know, like they got the likenesses, they got the sculpt down, just little things such as the scale and the color that I think really just speak to these figures being rushed out. And I hope in the future they take their time a little bit more and just do things right the first time. We're jumping backwards now to a figure that I think was just like really poorly executed. Reuse is a really important part of any toy line because they need to just pinch their pennies and save their budget on a lot of these figures, and so when they can use an older mold and reuse it again, they're always going to do that. I think this kind of feels more like it should have been a store exclusive rather than a mainline figure, since it is mostly reuse with a character that we just have had a lot of. I think this is a better head sculpt than the one we saw the first time they tried to do a Pedro Pascal head sculpt, but for the most part, I think the head sculpt just is a little bit weird. It's squished down to kind of fit inside that helmet. An alternate helmet, of course, would have been nice, but maybe we'll see that a little bit more frequently moving forward, especially with the TVC Sabine debacle with how bad that helmet looks. I think Hasbro has kind of decided, or realized that it's more important to get the right scale rather than just the playability of the helmet going on top of the head. This one also breaks my heart to put on the list because of how anticipated this was, both for me and for everybody else. The Magna Guard was just such a disappointing release. The issue with the shoulder pads popping off is just consistently annoying. Every time I try to pose this figure around, that happens, and it just makes me, it's one of those where it's like, you kind of get the figure into a pose and you don't want to touch it because you don't want it to fall over, you don't want the shoulder pads to pop off, you don't want to break a piece, which I did actually on my first one of these that I got. I broke the knee thinking that there was a swivel happening, and it was actually just the plastic bending, and then of course I brought it a little too far, and I got at least 5 or 6 comments from other people who have done the same or whose figures were broken right out of the box. When I heard that this was getting released, I was kind of glad that they waited until 2023 to do this, because I know that it's really difficult, but they executed the battle droid pretty nicely, and that was like 5 years ago at least. So I thought, just like given all of the new technology, that this would be an amazing release, and unfortunately it just is so much worse than so many of the other difficult droids that they've done recently. I feel like even the HK droid or the New Republic security droid are better executed than this, and so I don't really know what went wrong here, or if, just like the lack of quality control, but overall this figure is just not fun to play with, and that's kind of the whole point of these, because they are toys. Speaking of the HK droid, the one that came with the Ahsoka wave is just so weird. It looks, again, kind of like a credit collection figure, like it's like the retro collection. The color that they used is just so odd and vibrant and not Star Warsy. And the soft goods are actually okay, and like the sculpt on this is great, but just the lack of paint on the visor, I don't know what they were working with in terms of concept art. Maybe there wasn't any paint on the visor, or it's just like kind of like a darker red that they just didn't take the time to do, but this is just like such an easy pass. I actually ended up doing a repaint, which I have a full tutorial on my channel of how to fix this figure basically. So like this one, I'm happy that they released it because I did enjoy painting this, and I do think that the final result is actually quite nice. But just out of the box is just kind of unacceptable to me. And speaking of fixing figures, I ended up doing a thigh swap on both Balin and Shin. It helps a lot with the proportions and the height. They're still a little bit strangely sized, like Balin should just be physically bigger and Shin should be smaller, but getting the height adjusted definitely helps the overall appearance of these figures, so go check out that video if you want to see that as well. So this last one, it's not really about the figure itself, but just kind of a critique of character selection in general in the Black Series. There are definitely a lot of releases this year that are from new media that, it's like if you're gonna do new media for Andor, it's like, where's my Dedra Miro figure? Instead we got Bix Kayleen, who was like such a side character, whereas Dedra was clearly a main character, and I think that happens a lot. I know that Hasbro like hasn't seen the show when they decide which characters to make, or maybe they're even given direct mandates from the studios of which characters they should make first, but it's kind of annoying seeing a brand new sculpt and a figure spot just getting taken up by a character like Bix, where you're, like the figure itself is great, but like where's the more relevant characters? So there are plenty more amazing figures that came out this year, and probably a lot more that just kind of didn't fully meet my expectations, but those are the ones that really stood out to me, and I think it's interesting that they all came out towards the last quarter of the year. Otherwise, overall the year was pretty amazing, and there were other figures such as like Clone Wars Maul that I think were pretty great, but if I had a figure like Old Master Maul that was the same character and just executed a little bit better, then that's the one that I went with. So overall, I have reviews for every figure that came out this year on my channel, so if you are more curious about specific ones, you can go check out those videos. This is footage from my collection tour, which also went up very recently. If you want to see my entire collection that I have displayed, there's actually like probably 4 times as much stuff that's not on display, but these are definitely like my favorite figures of all time that I keep on display, so that video's out there if you want to watch it as well. Again, if you are new to the channel and you've made it this far, 20 minutes into the video, please go ahead and consider subscribing, or at least click the like button. All of that really helps out those of us that make YouTube content, which is why we're always so annoying about telling you to subscribe and whatnot. Let me know in the comments below your top 3 and bottom 3 of 2023. Thank you all for watching. As always, here are some other videos from my channel that you might enjoy, and I will see you all next time.